What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to Unit 6.2. We're doing imperialism still. First of all, if you forget what imperialism is, just a little refresher. It is the idea that one country goes in and conquers another country and forces their ideas or beliefs on that country. And this one, we're looking at South Asia. We're going to do 3 different case studies here, meaning we're going to kind of go around the world and look at imperialism and its impact and response to it in 3 different areas. This one is on South Asia. South Asia, if you forget, refers to, at this time period that we're talking about, really refers to what we would call India. Modern day stuff we're going to talk about is India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, but that's another story for another time. This is South Asia. Giddy up. Let's get going. We're talking 1750, 1900. So here we go. A little contextualization. Contextualization looking back on what happened previously to better understand what is going on in this time period. So 1450 to 1750. Let's get it. We're talking about the Mughal Empire. If you don't remember the Mughal Empire, go back and watch the videos from Unit 3. We're talking about the group that unified South Asia here under one government rule, and it's primarily a Muslim empire ruling over a majority Hindu people. They did allow religious toleration under their primary, like their main guy during this time period, which is Akbar the Great. However, during this period of 1450 to 1750, we do see the influence of the Europeans. Remember, the Europeans are exploring why the Mughal, this gunpowder empire, is existing, and the Europeans are coming in with their joint stock companies. And we have 2 primarily joint stock companies that are pushing into India with the Mughal Empire, and that is the British and the French. And those East India companies, the British East India and the French East India Company, are looking for natural resources to bring back and trade throughout back into Britain and throughout areas that Britain's trading. And we have cotton, spices, tea, which is a big thing. Also, we see opium. We haven't really talked about opium yet, and I want to save our opium talk when we get into China later in this period. But opium is a drug. It's found in this region, especially up here in the northern part, where it can be grown and used as a drug for intoxication, kind of the old school form of what we would look at as heroin essentially today, and kind of that opiate drugs, or that opiate category of drugs. We also, the East India Company is not conquering any areas. What they are doing, though, is they are going into areas on the coast and they're negotiating with local princes for trade deals. So the East India Company by 1750 definitely has a presence on the coast. You can see they have a huge influence here and down on the coastline, but they're also, these kind of dots show some areas that they have negotiated with local princes to get good trade deals and agreements. By 1700, and we didn't really mention this in Unit 3, and I just want to point out here, by 1700, the Mughal Empire is declining. They really hit their peak in the early 1600s, and as they're declining, the British East India Company has really started revving up their ability and their intensity of conquering and negotiating more with areas. So we see the East India Company going this way and the Mughal going this way. And as the East India Company is going this way, they're gaining access to territory, not the British government. It's really the East India Company on behalf of the East India Company that's doing this. So we're going to see, by 1750, we see this way for the East India Company, this way for the Mughal dynasty. And from 1750 to the mid-1800s, so we're kind of within this time period that we're talking about here, the BEIC, which again is just short for British East India Company, is going to really expand through 2 ways. One, through diplomacy. Like I said, they're going to just negotiate with local princes. They're going to basically say, hey, local prince, you're kind of on the decline. Your people look rebelling. Why don't you let us come in and we'll let you stay in power. You can keep some of your power, but we're going to kind of control the economy and control trade. So that's the negotiation side of things, where they're going to expand through diplomacy. Diplomatic means just diplomats, or people who represent and discuss things. Also military campaigns. They are going to go through and start conquering people. The British are industrialized, and that's kind of a key. And the Mughals in this area is not. So we're coming in with industrialized modern weaponry. The Mughals don't have that. So it's really kind of it's easy to conquer because of this, which goes back again. It's very similar to the 1450 to 1750 period, where the Europeans went out and conquered, for example, the Americas and had superior weaponry. Similar here. Also, just kind of a quick terminology here. There's something that the British East India Company used called the doctrine of lapse, which the people in India hated this idea. And a doctrine is just like a rule to live by. And basically, the British East India Company said, if an Indian prince doesn't have a male heir, so if an Indian prince dies without a male heir, the British East India Company are allowed to take over. Obviously, the people in India don't want the British East India Company taking over, but because they're from a point of power, and they force local people to sign this is the diplomacy side, that they say that if you don't have a male heir, we're going to take over. And the Indian people hate this. It's resented. It's a cause of a lot of issue, even to this day. It's looked back on as this kind of horrible idea. Also, these company people are going to be very small, but if you're going to start conquering people, you need a military. So the British East India Company are going to start hiring Indian soldiers called sepoys. So for example, you might hire sepoys from this region down here and bring them down to this southern region to work on behalf of you. And as a result of this, there's no nationalism in India. People don't say, hey, we're Indian. The people from up here don't look at themselves as people down here. So when they're attacking and going to war against these people, they look at themselves as being different because you identify by local region. But this map here shows the expansion of the British East India Company. You can see they're here, then they kind of have control over this area, and then by 1858 we're really expanding significantly, which we're going to get to here in a second. So there is resistance to this European rule, and it really comes to a head in 1857, 1858, and what is called, either you can refer to it as the Indian Rebellion of 1857, or it's often called as well the Sepoy Rebellion. And again, the Sepoys are the soldiers who have been hired by the British East India Company. In 1857, 1858, a rebellion breaks out. Now, the sepoys were treated horribly by the British East India Company. I often like to kind of say that the merchants in the British East India Company are kind of like young, upstart, cocky British people. I kind of look at them as kind of like jocks, like the old school, like jock mentality. Like, we're better than you. You're going to work on our behalf, and we're going to do what we can to make you feel a little bit lower than us. And these sepoys are going to be, as a result of being treated poorly, there's a lot of anger and outrage. And what is the final straw to them, besides just being treated poorly and kind of made fun of, and they get paid, but not a lot. And what happens is, a rumor breaks out in 1857 that the British East India Company, on the cartridges that need to be put into the gun, on the cartridges, what is used as the lubricant or the oil is grease from pig and cow fat. And essentially, Muslims don't eat or engage in anything dealing with pork or pig. And to the Hindus, cow is very sacred. And now you have these Hindu and Muslim sepoy soldiers using, on the gun cartridges, using pig and cow fat. And they also had to bite off the top of the cartridge as well, so they had to ingest it. And to the sepoys, this is sacrilegious. And one of the causes of the rebellion, besides being treated poorly, is this pig and cow fat being on it. And the sepoys rise up and rebel against the British East India Company. Now, there's more sepoys than there are British East India Company, but not all the sepoys are into this rebellion. Not all of them want it because they want to keep their jobs. And also, the British East India Company has better weapons. And this war of independence breaks out, where the British attempt to be kicked out by the Indians, and it's unsuccessful. The Indians are not successful because they don't have the weaponry that the British have. So totally unsuccessful. As a result of this, and this is just a picture of the people who try to rebel. We strap you to a cannon, and then we light it, and the cannonball goes through you. And this is just a picture. These are the sepoys, what they wore in the late 1800s. The impact of this, there's three kind of main impacts, or three effects of this rule. Number one is government. As a result of this attempt to rebel, the British Crown is like, heck nah. We're not letting this East India Company stay in charge anymore. It's getting too out of control. They're getting too much power and influence. And instead of letting this joint stock company run this subcontinent of South Asia, we, the British Crown, are going to take over. So basically, Queen Victoria of England in the mid-1800s says, I'm abolishing the British East India Company. It's done. Joint stock company mercantilism from the 1500s is done. We, the British Crown, are taking direct control over India. And they're going to call it the British Raj. And this is the nickname for India, or the name that the British give India at this time, is the British Raj. The Queen is going to appoint a viceroy or viceroyal, similar to what we saw during Age of Exploration in Spanish Latin America, as the head of India, directly appointed by the Crown. And it is supposed to carry out the laws of the Crown and what the Queen wants. But this person works on the Queen's behalf. They're going to use a civil service exam to recruit Indian bureaucrats, but most people who are going to hold high position are people from England. So English people are at the top in terms of government appointees and government power, and we're going to hire, we need a lot of people. This is a huge area, all right? So we need to have people helping us rule it. So we're going to hire Indian people who pass the civil service test, but they're going to be in lower positions than the British people. And this is the British Raj flag. You can see this is the British flag within it, showing subordination to the British crown. Number 2 impact is all about the money. So here's the deal. We got 2 things. 1, environmentally, we're going to require people in India, local farmers, to produce crops that are going to make us money. We're going to see an increase of peasant farmers with opium production, coffee production, tea, because we want to take those products and sell them within our British Empire and make as much money as possible. Number 2, technologically, the British are going to come in and start building industrialized things within India. So we're going to see the building of railroads, telegraphs, canals, which is good in some ways for the Indian people because it's going to allow more communication and more expansion and exchange of goods, which is good, but it's done at the sake of being treated as second-class citizens in your own country. The British are going to call India the jewel of the crown because it's making so much money for them. It's so profitable for them that the British make so much money off of this colony that they are going to call it the jewel of the crown. And again, on a crown, the crown jewel is like your pinnacle or ideal thing. So this is their jewel of the crown. The British do not promote Christianity, which goes against our causes of imperialism, our NERDS acronym in 6.1, but they are not going to promote Christianity. They know that Hinduism has been ingrained in India for so long, it's almost not even worth trying to force Christianity on their people because if you look at India's history, like Hinduism has been there. And to come in, same thing with the Mughals. They didn't come in and force people to practice Islam because they would have a rebellion on their hands. Number 3 is kind of what I call the oopsie daisy impact, meaning like we didn't really mean for this to happen and it's going to backfire, but like we didn't see 100 years ahead of what we were doing at this time. The British are going to take the people who pass the test on the civil service exam the best, and these elite people in India who are the most educated, and they are going to send them to London to be educated at the best colleges in England. These Indians are going to get educated in England. This is not long after the Enlightenment and revolutions are going on and democracy and idea of life, liberty, property. And these Indians are going to learn about these Enlightenment ideas and this idea of nationalism and unification and being together as one. And they're going to take these ideas from London, even though it's not the goal of the British to do this, they're going to learn and come back with these ideas of nationalism and enlightenment. And we're going to see the formation of the first nationalist groups in India to try and push out the British. And we're going to see the start of it now, and it's going to come to fruition or to completion in the next time period of 1900 to present. And we're going to see the Indian National Congress, which is formed, it's a group which sought to have Indian representation in the British Raj, increased Indian representation in the British Raj. And this Indian National Congress is going to be primarily made up of Hindus in India. And when the Hindus get their own Indian National Congress and they're trying to push for rights, the Muslims, who are about 10, 15% of the people living in South Asia, probably closer to 20, are going to say, hey, the Hindus have their own group. We should form our own group, our own nationalist group. And they form their own group called the All-Muslim League. And it's really their desire as well for independence, but they say, we don't want just Hindu representation. We want to make sure the Muslims are represented as well. So as a result of this imperialism and educating people in London who are supposed to come back and work for the British government, those people who come back are also going to say, hey, we should have our own country, which is nationalism, and we should base it off of Enlightenment and democratic ideas, which is connected to this time period as well. So that's a lot. It's a 14-minute guy on this one. As always, you got any questions, you write it down, you let me know. Hugely important topic, a little star as always. I'm out.